Today, we're once again talking about repacks, specifically focusing in on what I like to consider the artificial liquidity that they generate within this industry, within this hobby. It's something that we've talked about in the past, but haven't really touched on for a few months or for a year or so. So I want to talk about it again because I think it's super important and goes to videos that were spoken about in the last couple of weeks, actually, when it comes to repacks. And obviously, when we spoke about this recently, we touched on the gambling nature of them, the gambling aspect, and why I consider them to sort of have a predatory nature associated with them. Like I sort of said last time, when you're watching these breaks, when you're watching these repacks, breakers are very much pushing these on their customers. And it's hard to argue against the fact they're not gambling, right? They're very addictive when you watch people in these streams. So it's a bit of a sketchy situation. Now, rather than touch on those again, we want to talk about the sort of artificial liquidity that exists off the back of them. And the reason why this is front of mind and the reason why I thought this was a really good opportunity to talk about these again is because NeoCards and Comics put out a video earlier today talking about a company, Courtyard.io, that have allegedly made $42 million in 1 month selling repacks and other cards on their marketplace. And the way Neo goes ahead and justifies this is through some things that you're sort of seeing on screen right now. I'm not going to cover exactly what he said, so after you're done with my video, go ahead and check out his, but he sort of corroborates why he thinks that $42 million number is genuine. And if that is the case, that's a crazy, shocking amount of money. And when you think about the people going in there and spending that, it's very scary to think about how much liquidity that's creating in this industry that is actually fake and not real or realized gains. And what do I mean by that? You know, when we've spoken about this in the past, we've spoken about how repackers will go to card shows and they'll buy up entire tables at 80% comps, 60% comps, whatever it is, right? But you've got people buying cards and then not being able to sell them, and then having repackers sort of come in and save the day. They end up clearing out their whole table and sort of giving them the money that they need, which means they can go ahead and then spend that money elsewhere, and they can be a bit more risky with what it is they're buying, right? If you're a collector knowing you're going to go to a show and there's going to be repackers there, and you know they're going to buy, you know, tables or close to buying tables or buy large chunks, you can be a bit more risky with what it is you're chasing because you know they're going to come in and pay those comps, and at least at a minimum, you're going to make certain amount of money back. And you sort of see this a lot. You don't see it as much as what you used to maybe 12 months ago, 24 months ago. But if you're checking out card show vlogs or looking at, you know, recap videos from the likes of Mojo Sports, Card Collector 2, amongst many, many others, you're seeing these kind of things still happen. And then you go ahead and watch these repackers on their live stream or these breakers on their live stream, and they go ahead and talk about doing these kinds of things. And obviously, in the past, it was people like Justin Gamble pushing this really hard when he went ahead and made his repack. But it's a pretty common practice to sort of see. And when I've spoken about this in the past, it was always about concern, right? Because you've got people out there going ahead and buying cards, buying this kind of thing, spending this kind of money, knowing that they're going to have this, you know, security of a repacker coming in. And my thought process was, well, if people are out there spending money with that in mind, what's going to happen if the music stops one day and they don't have those people coming in to sort of buy these things? And my question always became, well, how much liquidity a repacker is actually putting in this industry that is artificial? Because these repackers are only buying heavy and buying out tables and doing this kind of thing because people are still coming on their platform and buying these cards, right? So they're making their sales. But if people stop buying repacks for whatever reason, the economy downturn, whatever it is, and then they stop buying from shows, that's a lot of people that are going to flick overnight, not being able to sort of sell product. And when that sort of happens, people start to panic. And that's where my mind, you know, has always gone with the danger of repacks. Aside from the gambling aspects I've spoken about before, I feel like there is so much of this industry is propped up by them and breakers that if that money was to go away overnight, that's pretty scary, because how many people are sort of out there, you know, buying cards and flipping cards off the back of that kind of money? And if that money stops, there's nobody there to sell cards to, not as many as what you thought in the past or as many that there were in the past. So you're sort of shit out of luck and you're then stuck holding the bag. And when enough people start holding the bag, what does that mean, you know, long term? I think it means that people, you know, are going to be stuck holding cards that aren't worth anything, and then people are going to sort of dip out of the hobby, because I think it's been pretty obvious in recent months in particular, especially with the Pokemon space, how much people are still relying on the flipping game and how many people are sort of in this hobby purely to flip. And that's perfectly okay if that is what you want to do. But when you're thinking about the long-term viability of this industry and the long-term viability of collecting, if everybody has that mindset or everybody's approaching it that way, or the vast majority are, what is that going to mean long-term? That seems like there's a lot of artificial liquidity in this industry. I've said that word a few times now, and that's also the case in the Pokemon game, where you're sort of seeing all those people come in and buy things to pretend to collect, but in reality, they're only in it for the money, and they're sort of keeping everything in pristine condition. Everyone's getting them graded, everything is PSA 10 these days. And then in 20 years' time, they're going to try and sell it because, hey, I've got this PSA 10, but not realizing that there's 30,000 other people doing the exact same thing as you, right? That sort of mindset is going into the same talking points here. And that's where, my concern comes. But where things are a bit more interesting off the back of Neo's video, again, it is this one over here. Please check it out. That's a crazy amount of money. When you factor it in for a digital repack where there are no overheads, it's really easy to do and there's that much money going into it, not to mention the likes of Fanatics now getting on board. If this thing becomes more mainstream, especially from a digital repack perspective where they are physical cards and they have obviously, lower fixed costs and lower variable costs because you're not printing packaging or anything like that, it gets a little bit scary because the profit margins are even more insane and there's going to be more incentive for then people to go ahead and sell them. And because the ease of access is there, it's really easy to click and buy. And it's sort of a really good transactional opportunity for customers because you don't actually have to go to a store. You don't have to, maybe wait for the repack to get shipped out to you or anything like that. Obviously, you have to wait for the card to come to you. But it's one of those ones where that efficiency could spell for disaster long term purely because you're going to have so much money being spent off that efficiency. And when you've got more people going in and spending it, my fear is that you're going to have more of what I just explained for the first 3 or 4 minutes of this video, where there's going to be an even greater amount of liquidity coming in that's purely artificial. And if Fanatics sort of gets on board with this, like they have with their instant rips thing, and they make it out to be a bigger deal than what it currently is planned to be, i.e. I think it was only 1,000 cards or 1,000 packs. If they make this thing mainstream and they start pushing it everywhere, it's a lot more cards that they're going to have to be buying to fill these things. And that's going to give people opportunity to go ahead and sell cards to Fanatics and for them to get cards from the likes of PSA that people want to head and sell back on their marketplace and all that kind of thing. And that's where, in my mind, it becomes the artificial liquidity. It becomes the, mortgage-backed security, subprime mortgage scandal that we spoke about last time, and maybe a year or two ago when we mentioned those things for the first time. It's the same sort of thing. You've got this whole industry propped up by these transactions that are not super genuine, that don't make sense. And fundamentally, the reason why I think they don't make sense is because so many of these cards are not cards that collectors actually want to own. And we've spoken about that before. What are cards that people want to own? They're the cards of, athletes that matter, the legends, the GOATs. They're cards of people's PC teams. They're cards that have, on-card autographs, match one memorabilia in them, all that kind of thing, right? Fundamentally, that is the core of what people want to own, along with rookie cards and first appearances and all that kind of thing. So when you start creeping outside of that, that's where my fear comes into it. And that's where I think this, artificial liquidity has the most concern, because it starts meaning that people are spending more and more on the things that don't matter. And you might say as a repacker, well, I'm going to go ahead and buy this thing and pay 60% comps, but is those 60% comps ever going to be realized? Like, sure, you can make your money off the repack, but somebody's gone ahead and then paid 200% comps for that repack, and then they're going to get a 60% comp card off the back of it that they can't go ahead and sell anywhere. So they've just lost at 140%. Sure, you as a business has made the money, you've made the profit margin, and you're going to keep that money within this hobby, within this industry, because as a repacker, you want to keep growing. But the person who's paid for it is now left holding the bag. They're not going to get their money back ever. So if more and more of that keeps happening, how many people are going to have cards in their hands that are sort of, worthless? And if this becomes the focal point, and I think it will be. I think these repacks are going to be a bit of a slippery slope, like I said. I'm a bit worried now. And obviously I'm rambling a little bit, but I think you guys get the point, especially if you listen to all my other videos and you sort of combine them all together with my thoughts and comments, because it's a bit dangerous. And I very much see this being similar to the whole CDOs and subprime mortgage scandal of the 2008 GFC. Now, obviously, you would have seen The Big Short and Margin Call and all that kind of thing. If you haven't seen those films, please go ahead and check them out, because it is very similar in my opinion, because you essentially had a situation there where you had, all these products propping up an industry, right, that were essentially artificial because nobody truly wanted to own the underlying things. And obviously with repacks, you sort of know what's going to be in them via a checklist, which you could say was the whole CDO thing where you knew that there was shit product in there. But, it was really hard to tell, right? And that's why people sort of fell for it and weren't aware, and that's why the market crashed. And I see very similar parallels here. You've basically got these overpriced cards in these repacks constantly being fed by people taking risk and buying all this kind of thing. Eventually, people are no longer going to want to buy those things because they're going to realize they're overpriced. And if they're not done right, and some of them might be done right, I think Instant Rips has a good opportunity based on what I've seen to do the right thing. But if they're not done right, that's a whole lot of money being spent that's not really going to go anywhere in terms of money back into the hands of collectors. And if that's the case, collectors won't want to buy anymore. And if collectors don't want to buy anymore, then there's no industry, in my opinion, moving forward. So it's a bit sketchy. So I'm rambling. Let me know your thoughts down below. People probably won't like this, as always. They don't like these kinds of videos from me, but it is what it is. That's what I like to talk about. So if you did like it, please give it a like, please give it a follow. And I would encourage you all to sort of share it, please, if you're, into doing that for me, because the YouTube algorithm has been pretty shit lately, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's not really been pushing my videos. So I would really appreciate if you could leave a comment, like, share, and all that kind of thing. It's not something I normally ask for, but it would really, really help. So anyway, if this video didn't make sense, please let me know, and we can go from there. Cheers.